back to this another video. I'm going to get straight into today's video. The last time I did a video on storytelling, I said to you that I will do part 2 in the video. So I'm going to go straight ahead into what we're talking about. Now, I trust that that video was useful. So here we are with part 2. Now, when we think about storytelling within the Caribbean and what it has evolved into, etc., we have to think about all the people, the many different people who would have assisted in allowing storytelling to be what it is today and how much it has evolved. Yes, the general community and society would have assisted, but we have some persons who would have taken it to another level. They've made from it a career, a profession, and so they can be classified as actual storytellers or professional storytellers who would have really done various research. They'll have a range of various stories to tell, etc. And they're right across the Caribbean, and we just want to highlight and point out a few of them. And so, for example, I'm going to start right here in Jamaica. Our own, late Miss Louise Bennett. She's known as a very solid folklorist. And I mean, if we do our own research, we would see the amount of work that she would have done. She's one of our storytellers extraordinary. May her soul rest in peace. Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks, currently still one of the storytellers, still very active, still making waves and trying to ensure that she leave that kind of legacy for the preservation of our own culture. There we had Joan Andrea Hutchinson. I mean, she's not necessarily telling as much story as before, but there was a point that was her in the telling of these stories. And if you think about other places of the Caribbean, for example, you have Paul Keynes Douglas, I think that's his name. I think he's Grenadian, Trinidadian, etc. He would have also been one of those strong storytellers that we have. I think out of Barbados, you have Alfred. I don't remember his name. Don't kill me. I don't remember his name. So, but you can drop some storytellers from the various Caribbean islands in the comment section, and so we know who they are because they're right across. We have from St. Lucia, Guyana, all over. So just take a moment, put a storyteller, the name of a storyteller from your territory in the comment section so that we will know who they are. Yeah, but these are the people who have been consistently telling the stories of the Caribbean and carrying on and passing on this legacy, and so we really need to be able to talk about them. And so we've spoken about who the storytellers are, these practitioners are of the storytelling. But you also play a role as general people and community because you continue to tell these stories in many different ways. But let us look a little bit at what some of the traits or the characteristics of a good storyteller would be when we think about storytellers. We want to find that storytellers need to be engaging. You have to be able to engage your audience. And this just brings me to pause for a moment to talk about the 3 main things as it relates to storytelling, what it should be doing for you. You want to talk about the captivation of your audience, that's one. Secondly, you want to talk about the retention of the audience, and the third thing you want to ensure as a storyteller that you are doing is that there's a transfer of that cognitive knowledge. So there are 3 things that as a storyteller you want to make sure happen. I'm going to repeat them. Captivation of audience, retention of audience. So yes, you can capture me at the beginning, but you want to make sure that I stay with you to the end of your story, and you want to make sure that I'm learning and I'm absorbing what you're saying, and that we're talking about what the transfer of that cognitive knowledge in terms of what it is that you're telling me. And so therefore you have to amplify the traits within you as a storyteller. So you want to go for your as I say, you want to be engaging. You want to make sure that the process is interactive. So the audience and the storyteller, you're interacting with each other. And that can be done through constant repetition. It can be done through the singing and the dancing, etc. If you go back to the other video that I did, or the previous video, you'll hear us talk about those. Also, as a storyteller, you want to be animated. Yes, make eye contact, to be animated, so your entire body is involved. Face, eyes, your hands, your gestures, all of those things must very much be involved in your presentation or your performance as a storyteller. Additionally, you want to be able to manipulate your voice, because it's important when you're able to manipulate your voice, because you're able to take on the various characters verbally. And remember, in the last video we did, we talked about the importance of languaging when we are telling these different stories. And so therefore, a part of the languaging is how you use your voice as a storyteller. So you want to be able to do that kind of manipulation. So you take on the characters vocally. Yes, you also want to be able to make that distinction between character 1, character 2, character 3, as well as how the storyteller will sound as you're telling the story. But you want to capture the various emotions, and that is why it is so important that you manipulate your voice when you are telling the story. And so as a storyteller, that is important. Again, as a storyteller, if you are a triple threat as a storyteller, that's good. Yeah, if you can sing, you can dance, and you can act, it's even nicer for you. It doesn't mean that you have to be able to do all of those in order to be a storyteller, but if you have them something there, something will go on for you. It's an advantage if you're going to be a storyteller. But all those elements are necessary. Being able to gesticulate, taking on the gestures to create the kind of imagery that you want for your audience to get when they are telling the story. Because when you're telling a story, you're taking people on a journey, and because you're taking them on this journey, you want them to be able to what? To come along with you. So you have to create a situation that will allow your audience to come along with you on this particular journey. So let us switch gears a little bit and look at some other things as it relates to storytelling. One of the things we want to look at is storytelling in its traditional setting. Here we are, storytelling in its traditional setting or its authentic setting. And so we want to look at a comparison, storytelling in its authentic setting, but we also want to look at it in a staged state. So let's start by looking at the traditional setting of storytelling. Again, I will always make reference to the previous video, because a part of looking at storytelling in its traditional setting, it's going to bring you to a space where you're also looking at the purpose of storytelling. Because one of the things about storytelling is that it's impromptu, it's also improvisational, and we did mention that before. So because we know that it is impromptu and it is improvisational, we are therefore going to look at it in its stage state. And I'm going to read something for you that would have been documented, as a matter of fact, by S. Rattray. I got this bit of information from the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission, JCDC, when I was doing some research some time ago about the setting of storytelling. And what this person would have done, would have documented this bit of information from the 1920s about a storytelling session that he would have been engaged in at that time. And he said a group would assemble in a circle after dark in the village street, or if it rains, in some open patio, to hear and relate their own tales. During some storytelling evening, between the various tales and often in the middle of the story, the actor will enter the circle and give impersonations of the various characters in the story. The evening hours were set aside for storytelling, and it became primarily a leisure time activity. Now, this is very crucial, because remember in the previous video when we talked about storytelling, we did say that storytelling over time became a major form of entertainment for these people in that traditional sense. And so here in this description that we're getting from Rattray, it's talking about the fact that it was done mostly in the afternoons, because what, after persons would have worked all day in the fields, this is what they would do as leisure time. Yes, today everybody might go a bar and you got like a party, etc. Then they never had all of those things, and so that became their leisure time activity. But I want you to pay keen attention to the setting. It's talking about gather in a circle in the village street. So what it tells you is that storytelling was a community affair. That is what you're getting from this information. It was a community affair. It was done in a circular fashion. And this is also very much connected to what researchers would have found out about how storytelling evolved. Because when you think about people having a bonfire, and that's a traditional thing, you would always have people gathering around fires when you're having a bonfire to tell a story. And that's the general setting of it. Yes? I'm also now going to share with you another documentation, still information that I got from the Jamaica Cultural Development. And this is information that has been documented that was given by Ronnie Williams. Yes, Mas Ran, we all should know Mas Ran if you're a Jamaican, maybe some other Caribbean people would know him. So he also documented what storytelling sessions were like for him growing up as a child. So here goes. And he says, we would sit down around her maybe on the barbecue, maybe in the kitchen at crop time while we were shelling peas and so, or maybe just sitting down there and telling us these different stories. Now, this is what he would document about his own storytelling experience with his grandmother. And if you notice what he said, they would just be sitting down and telling the story, maybe shelling peas or doing some amount of work, doing crop time, or maybe they're just sitting down and these stories are being shared. Again, this also fits within what the purpose of storytelling was. It helped to make work light. So once persons are working, there's always somebody telling story. But this also captured that thing about the grandparents being the gatekeepers of stories, because here sitting down with grandmother, his experience with his grandmother is that we are shelling peas, grandma is telling us these stories. If we are just sitting down in the kitchen, grandma is telling these stories. And that's the kind of information when you think about storytelling in its traditional setting. So it was impromptu. You didn't have to plan to tell the story. Sometimes you're just sitting down, you're doing work, and your grandparents will start telling you the story. Or it was just that kind of entertainment moment where everybody would sit down. The important thing to note, though, as it relates to the setting and its traditional state, is that there was always a kind of gathering. It was always a community affair, that kind of gathering, and persons would just come together and just share the tales. And if this is happening consistently, if somebody should die, the tales live on, and it continues because of what? That community spirit of telling the story. And that is how the stories gets passed on from one place to the next, or from one generation to the next. Grandma tell grandchildren, those grandchildren will eventually tell their children, and that's how the stories live on. So I really want us to take keen attention and keep note as to how these stories happen in its traditional sense. But if you want to take it out of that traditional sense now, let us put it in a performative manner, because storytelling by itself is a performance art, because the storyteller is performing the story. But if you want to look at it in its staged state, what are some of the things that you want to pay attention to? When you're thinking about storytelling in its staged state, the first thing you might do away with the setting. So you don't have that circle that Rattray spoke about. It may not be done in that format that Ronnie Williams spoke about that happened with the grandmother, right? You might find that in a staged state, the natural thing that comes with the improvisation, where there's a natural response in telling the story, you have to engage in a series of rehearsals within that stage state in order to capture what it is that the storytelling in its authentic state would capture. So that's one of the first things we want to remember. You want to think about the kind of characterization that happens in the stage state, because in a stage state with storytelling, the storyteller is written into a larger story. And so the setting of the story at that time is dependent on what the larger script is about. And so you're written in, and so whatever the playwright writes for you as a storyteller, that is how it is that you're going to do the work. But it goes a little further than that. When you have the director as a storyteller, the leverage is not only yours to utilize the space and interact with the audience at will. It is done within the context of what the director is asking of you. And so but if there's no director and you are the one that's directing yourself, you also have a little more leverage, and you'll find that you will do the same thing over and over and over and over. So if you do 5 performances, the 5 performances will look the same, as opposed to in its authentic state and its traditional setting, if you tell the same story 5 different times, because of the nature of how impromptu it is and the community spirit and leisure time, you might find that it might change for the 5 different times that you say, as opposed to in its stage state. But you also want to think about how it is that as a storyteller, you're actually communicating a particular message in its stage state, because in its stage state, as the storyteller, your action says something. You also want to think about how the storyteller reacts with the other persons within the performance when you're staging it. When you're doing a stage thing, you might also end up with a whole lot of props that you might want to use to help to tell the story. And so within a stage for performance, where the story will take a whole different shape. The nature of the interaction too might be different, because when you're interacting with the audience, it depends on the type of audience that you have at any given time. If you have a certain kind of audience, you might find that some of them are way more responsive, and so there's a lot more that you can do. You might also find that some not as responsive as others, and so it limits how you respond and how you move forward. And so we have to pay attention to these things when you thinking about the stage. Also, in a stage performance, you say what the script dictates. Yeah, you say what the script dictates, and so it may not lend itself to that kind of improvisation that in a traditional setting the storytelling will allow. And so that is why storytelling as a performing art, yes, it is flexible, but it also has its own restriction, because you have to now make it very theatrical. And once you start making it very theatrical, you have to operate within the confines of what the script dictates for you to do. All right, and so that is when you look at the difference. So those are the things that we are talking about when we are looking at storytelling in its stage state versus when you are looking at storytelling in its traditional setting. Now we want to shift gear again and look at storytelling within a text and how storytelling influences the various texts within the Caribbean. All right, so we're going to be looking at the storytelling in the various texts. And storytelling is really that powerful because, and as a cultural form, a number of writers of the various classics that we all know and we are often studying have used storytelling in a number of the plays. And two of them that I want to mention are Old Storytime, and we also want to look at Ti-Jean and his brothers. Those are two very powerful Caribbean works that would have incorporated storytelling. Now, when you look at storytelling in Old Storytime, you find that what Pa Ben would have done, there's a moment where he started out framing this story, that somebody is actually telling this story. And so you would see everybody gathering, starting out around Pa Ben in its authentic state, where they are gathered in a circle and the story would have started, and then it moves. The storyteller starts and then it moves into the actual action of the play itself. But within Old Storytime, what you also realize, if you pay attention, you can see how is it that Pa Ben himself played the actual character of Pa Ben in the story, but you also see him as Pa Ben, the storyteller. So he plays two different roles in the story as you're reading the play. Pa Ben, the storyteller, Pa Ben, the actor in the play. Now, if you're staging that piece of work, you're also now going to stage it in a way that the audience or whoever plays that role is able to make that distinction in terms of what they are giving to the audience who is paying attention. Pa Ben as the storyteller, Pa Ben as the character in the play. But then you want to look at Ti-Jean and his brothers. Now, another thing about Ti-Jean and his brothers, what Ti-Jean and his brothers does, when you look at how the storytelling would have influenced that particular work, you want to look at the use of the different characters within Ti-Jean and his brothers. Now, stories on a whole, if we look at Caribbean folk tales, they often make use of animals. Yes, and mythical characters, and Ti-Jean does that very well. Ti-Jean and his brothers, that happens quite well because the storytellers are really animals. The frog is one of the leading storytellers in Ti-Jean and his brothers, because what? They are carrying this story for you, and so Ti-Jean and his brother make use of the animals going into the forest. But a very important thing in Ti-Jean and his brothers, and if we know what that story is about the three brothers who set out on a quest, and the devil would have given them the thing, they challenged them to not get angry. Whoever gets angry, he will eat them. And he was able to be successful with the first two brothers. But when it came to the smaller brother, which is Ti-Jean, Ti-Jean was able to outsmart the devil. Yes, and so again, what Ti-Jean would have represented, and the element taken from our storytelling component, is that characteristic of Anansi as our folk hero. And I spoke about that in our previous video, where Anansi is seen as the folk hero and how it is that the people of the Caribbean revere Anansi, or the people revere Anansi because Anansi will represent the small man who uses his wit to outsmart the bigger person. And so in Tijon and his brothers, Tijon is often equated to that small man, and Anansi, who uses his wit to outsmart the devil. Yeah, because the devil was seen as more powerful, and so the bigger man, but Tijon was able to outsmart him. And so that is an element from the storytelling within the Caribbean that would have influenced and shaped how that particular work happens within it. Now it also uses a mythical character because it delve into other folk forms, other cultural forms in terms of the kind of masquerade, etc. And so therefore it gives you a lot to work with. So it influences how the story on a whole progresses. It influences the choice of characters. It also influences the structure of the play. That's how the storytelling influences Caribbean text. Three things: character, the structure of the story, and just generally how the story progresses and how the story unfolds. Yeah, basically you want to also look at the plot itself. And so if we pay attention to all the purposes of storytelling, yes, and what they involve, and then you examine these two particular texts, you will see the difference. And so I'm encouraging you in this moment, if you've never read any of those two texts, I'm encouraging you to go and read both of them. Just examine them for their storytelling element and component, and you'll see how much you can see. Now I'm going to show you just a short clipping, a very, very brief clipping of Tijon and his brothers that was staged at the Edna Manley College School of Drama, and it was directed by one of the best directors in the Caribbean, Eugene Williams. Here is a short snippet.
Well, one time, it had a mother, and that mother had 3 children. The first one was Roger. He was the strongest, arms like iron, but he was very stupid. The second son that was called in Mission. In size, the second biggest, so you only half as stupid. Now, he was a fisherman, always studying. And some fisherman, when he go in and fish, always forget the bait. So between the bait and the bait,
Me bukite kuya. Lookman, who was a fool.
Poverty bird. All hands dried up like clouds. Heaping was sticks and sticks, too weak to protect our necks. Look before that family, live in a little house on the forehead of the mountain, where night and day was rain, mist, clouds white as cotton hanging from the dripping branches, where sometimes it was so cold that the frog would stop his singing. The cricket would stop his rattling, and the wandering firefly that light the tired woodsman home through the raining trees could not strike a damn match to star the wanderer home.
I damn sorry for that, mother.
Aye, Cricket. You croak truth. Life of an old woman. Her husband covered in earth, where the bamboo leaves lie lightly, and smelling of mouldering flesh. How well I know that story. Where the mother was? Across the wet and melancholy mountain where our hut was? Oh God, the devil used to live.
always have its own performance modes. Yes, and just like all other cultural form, it by itself will utilize them. So you talk about the music and the dance and the drama. The previous video would have discussed those in details. Yeah, and so the song that you put in there, the music you put in there, is all up to you as the storyteller, but that's one of the modes that you can put in. You also utilize a dance. So as the storyteller, you dance how you see fit for your story, but it's also a way to include and incorporate your audience to get that kind of interaction that storytelling is supposed to be about. And the dramatics is also about the improvisational component of it as well, and the general story structure, because if you look at story, there's a strong what you do call it now, dramatic component, because you have to become the character and you have to look at the elements of story. All of those things are critical. Yeah, all of those are critical when you think about what the elements of story are and how it is that finds its way as performance into what the performance is, because you have to tell the story with a structure that allows people to understand. If you don't have no structure, yeah, and it's all over the place, people are not going to be able to follow you. They're going to be totally thrown off. And so because of that, you have to find the theatrical modes that will assist you in that regard. But what is important when you get into performance mode and start staging stories, it allows you to be able to look at how it is that the elements of theater will fit into or connect or build a relationship with the physical elements within the cultural form of story. And if you look at what the elements of theater are, and just for one member, you all know, you think about all of those elements that help to make up your story. You think about your props, you think about your costuming, you think about your music, you think about your sound, just the overall spectacle as to what is going to make theater and a full-fledged production works. And if you look at what the physical elements of the cultural form are, and we would have discussed those in our previous video, we talk about what the paraphernalia, we're talking about the props, we talk about the music, we talk about the sound, so much we went into the languaging, and we talk about the movement. If you are looking, you realize that storytelling will utilize naturally, or cultural forms on a whole will naturally be utilizing all the theatrical elements. So what you can find and realize and understand from this and deduce is that there is a natural relationship that exists between cultural forms and the elements of theater. So when you think about the various performance modes that can be found within the cultural forms, you want to know also think about your elements of theater, because there's going to be the music, dance, etc. But you also want to think about now some of your techniques that you're going to be using to tell your story. And this could take us into textual analysis. We should go there, but we are not going to go there, because when you think about the constant repetition, because repetition is that technique that is going to help you to be engaging as a storyteller. It is that technique that is going to help to make the piece what? Interactive. It is that technique that is going to help with the captivation, the retention, and also the transfer of that cognitive knowledge that you want your audience to have, because repetition is a very strong technique in storytelling, so we can utilize that. We can also look at other dramatic techniques that you might want to utilize, because some stories might be told in the form of a flashback. Yes, and so what you find is that these performance modes are also mixed with other kind of dramatic modes in order for you to be able to get the best out of it. And that is why staging storytelling, or looking at storytelling in the stage state, will take in so many things. And when you're looking at performance modes, you can't just limit it to just music, dance, and drama, because there are so many other things that you can do as you're doing that. But what it is that we want to quickly point out before we end the video is that as we're looking at performance modes, they also, and talking about storytelling, you want to think about how storytelling relates to our popular culture, because a lot of times what we don't pay attention to is how it is that here within the Caribbean, our own contemporary people, with dancehall artists them and with soca artists them and with calypso artists them, how strong of a storyteller they are. And if you pay attention to the calypsonians, listen, They are the boss at this thing. So what I would suggest to you, go and think of any calypso song and listen to it again, or just go and research some calypso song and see if you can't find the full stories in these calypso songs. Yeah? Find one, put it in the comment section and let us talk about it. See if you can identify what the story is. But the Calypsonians are mega storytellers in our contemporary culture. So along with all the other persons that I would have mentioned at the beginning, some of them are the ones that you are going to research, you can add the Calypsonians to those practitioners as storytellers, because they tell stories. Like I said, our dancehall artists, they tell stories, because this is why the performance modes as music as a performance mode is so strong, because there are various mediums through which we can tell the different stories that we are telling. The Calypsonians use their music, the dancehall artists use their music, and some of the soca artists will use their music, and through that medium as well, they are also able to carry out some of the other functions of storytelling that we would have mentioned before, because we talk about storytelling being a way to state what our grievances are, and a range of different things, and the political statements that we want to make, ridicule, satire, etc. Through these kind of counter-popular music or popular ways of telling stories, those things are still happening. Yeah, and so we want to pay keen attention to that and give that some consideration as we discuss this concept of storytelling. And so I trust and hope that this bit of information was quite useful. I know it's a mouthful, and I try to keep it as concise as possible, but try to make it as detailed as possible. So I trust and hope that you did find this information useful. So if you have any questions, please to put it in the comment section and let us talk some more. If you have any comment as well, put it in the comment section and let us continue the story. Thank you so much for watching.